What's up, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Jabril, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope everyone's doing well out there.
And for you guys who have never seen the show before, we're just two guys that like to talk over the biggest stories in game, but we always like to start with what we've been playing. So, Steve, what you been playing?
Yeah, so just two new little, things. Obviously, I think, well, according to the sales record, everyone's playing Resident Evil 4 Remake has come out. Good on Capcom. I think they said it was up in the millions within a couple days sold, so which is not a surprise. So, yep, playing Resident Evil 4 Remake. I haven't gotten as far as I would hope to, just because timing, it's worked out really funny. But what I've played of it and what I've remembered, it's been a while since I played the OG Resident Evil 4. It's what I can think of when I want a masterpiece brought forward in every sense of the way. I mean, most people hold Resident Evil 4, and rightfully so, as one of the greatest games of all time and the best Resident Evil of all time, a 10 out of 10 at the time, and it's weird to see it all translated into what's considered now a 10 out of 10. I haven't run into any issues. I know there's apparently some small game-breaking bugs here and there, but they're apparently really simple ones to avoid, and they're working on patches for it. But it's exciting to get into this world again, experience the story again, just even small line changes, seeing this stuff in true HD. This is a original GameCube exclusive game that was been brought forward all the way up to the last gen. There was a PS4 port, quote unquote, of Resident Evil 4, so having a full-fledged remake, it's crazy, and it's crazy how much muscle memory is just instilled in me, because every time I go to shoot someone, I'm not walking and shooting. I stand still, just because it's what's there in my brain. But it's exciting, it's remixed in a nice way where some things feel new. Puzzles have moved around a little bit. There's always been that, I always call them, there's always those wishing wells where you have to get a little pendant that, if you don't break that first log first, it's going to fall in the mud. It's worth nothing. So it's interesting seeing all these guys, seeing the merchant, a fan favorite, seeing the merchant, even though he still has his famous line, the "what are you buying?" Just, I feel like he doesn't deliver as hard as it should. But again, minor just differences, but a full-fledged, just really polished game. Capcom, I don't know if it's just how easy or how well known they are with this RE engine, they really know how to optimize everything. I'm playing on PS5, the native PS5 version. I've had no issues at all with anything, really. I will give them this. It's just the game feels slightly more difficult. I don't know if it's just me or the version, the mode I'm playing on. I forgot which one. But man, these guys can take some bullets, and these old ladies with the pitchforks, I've gotten stabbed way too many times with them. And I don't know if it's just the habit of playing the game, or when the mobs start coming on, it does get a slightly just overwhelming in the sense that I feel like I could handle this. And I'm sure it's all to balance some of these new mechanics, and how easy the pairing is now compared to what it used to be. And just, again, being able to constantly move and shoot, I think all really works well. So I got to give them some props. Fantastic game. It's really good. When I'm playing it, I'm super excited for it, just because it's just such a staple. And I'm all for these new Resident Evils just being, future-proofed, in a sense, for so long. And we can only assume more of these are coming. The only other thing I've been playing, which it's a semi-April Fool's joke, but it's a real thing, is the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh, yes.
So it's a real thing. I know I sent you the trailer and the screenshot of it on the day before April's Fool's, so whatever it was, on Friday. And I sent this to a couple other people. There's a trailer, and the game itself, it's just a little point-and-click basic adventure. No, Sonic's not really dead. It's Amy's birthday, and they're doing one of those, and it's one of those murder whodunit mystery things you can do in real life, where you guys are role-playing in olden time, and someone murders, and it's like a group activity. It's the original escape room in a sense, and that's what the Sonic crew is doing, point and click. Nothing really crazy there. I think it's just interesting that they did this. I'm more excited that Sega again is working with these indie developers, with their IP. It's not like they're not called Sonic. It's with their IP. It's officially published on Sega's page. And it's exciting that and I love this kind of stuff. It throws a lot back to when, obviously a way better game, when Nintendo let there was that the Cadence of Hyrule game.
Oh
Which,
yeah.
again, that obviously superior in many senses, but I like when they let you have these different things that exist. There's no harm in it. And then cherry on top, the whole game's free. It's not like I was gonna buy this. Well, maybe, but but I'm a special case. But the game is completely free. It's released. It's there. It's not voice acted or anything. It's obviously a way throwback to these old point and click adventures. No voice acting. I haven't really figured out the mystery. I'm not dying, or no pun intended, dying to get through the game. I just needed to check it out because I saw it, and it showed up as a recommendation for me, and I saw it obviously on their page. But it's a fun little thing just to get in there, see them in these old-timey outfits, all trying to just have fun. It's exciting. There's some throwbacks. There's like Easter eggs and stuff. Knuckles has an outfit reminiscent of his old animated series outfit. So it's really cool and it's really fun. So that's all I've really been playing with. Just, the big one is the Resident Evil. Sonic was a quick little snapshot. So that's all I've been playing, actually. So what have you been up to?
Yeah, so just kind of two games that I've kind of dabbled with, or one I've actually played quite a bit, and then the other one I've kind of dabbled with. The first one is 9 Years of Shadows. I send you the trailer of this one for anyone who doesn't know. This is basically another Metroidvania, but this one really kind of taps into the Symphony of the Night style specifically. I'm playing it on Steam. It's eventually gonna have I think Switch port eventually, but for right now I think it's PC exclusive. And yeah, so far it's pretty solid. For the most part, I like it quite a bit. There are things that I don't like about it. Some are more nitpicky, but generally I think it's a pretty fun experience. Especially if you're a Castlevania fan, I think you'll get a kick out of it. There's a couple things that your mileage may vary depending on how much it resonates with you. There are some mechanics. One of the fundamental things to this game is that you have this other character that kind of floats around you that is not only the ability to like projectile blast things, but is also tied into your health, and then you can restore it by either hugging it or hitting enemies. And so if you get hit, it kind of drains that, and so it kind of blocks your ability to attack certain characters, because some characters are only vulnerable to those light attacks. So you get into an interesting rhythm of where like you are trying to like recharge this gauge while simultaneously dodging, and that is where I think a decent amount of the challenge has been for me. Generally, it's a pretty easy game, especially if you have a lot of experience with Metroidvanias. I don't think you'll have that much issue with this one. It's a hell of a lot easier than Castlevania. I think in terms of the newer Metroidvanias, you'll have the ones that I think evoke a lot of the old school punishing vibe of Castlevania, and I think that's more of like Blasphemous, Moonscars, stuff like that. This one is definitely more in line with I think like Dead Cells, for example, of that kind of difficulty, like where it does scale, but for the most part you can go through it with relative ease. One detraction I would say is that it is incredibly linear, which is really problematic for a Metroidvania. Now, obviously, I think there is a spectrum of like where backtracking goes too far, where there's like too much, which is more like a Metroid Prime, for example. It's just way too much backtracking. This one has very little backtracking at all. Like every once in a while, you'll get like a new ability where, okay, if I go back that way, I can unlock some new areas that I wasn't able to access before. Kind of textbook Metroidvania stuff. But for the most part, you kind of are on a set path, and it kind of leads you to one area, to the next boss, to the next enemies. The enemy variety is a little low, so there are things where you can kind of look at it and be like, okay, I can tell that this is definitely a smaller team. This is not Castlevania. There's not like that large scale major production, but there, not to ever like rag on it, because there's the visuals are beautiful. The music is really, really solid. The gameplay generally, as you kind of like traverse and platform, is actually really solid. I think it's running pretty okay. There are some technical issues with it. I know some people are having some crashing issues. I have an issue where I can't render cutscenes, but I am playing on the Steam Deck, and it's not Steam Deck verified technically. So, take that with a grain of salt. You might not encounter those issues if you play it on PC, but overall, I recommend it. Only issue, it is, I think, $20 full price, $15 on sale when it launched. When I got it, I don't know if that sale is still going. You're only getting about 5 to 9 hours of gameplay, depending on how long it takes you. I've kind of taken my time with it, so I still haven't beaten it. I'm pretty deep into it, but I know that it's not a ton left for me to play, so I'm not rushing through it or anything like that. But it is a little bit on the shorter side, so just keep that in mind. It's not something that's going to take a dozen of hours to get through, unless you're like a completionist, or maybe if you play it multiple times. I don't know if this has New Game Plus ability or anything like that, but generally just keep that in mind. If $15 to $20 and you get 7 hours of gameplay, if that's good value for you, then go for the game. But I would totally understand if people were like, okay, that's like nothing, so I'd rather not get into it. Maybe you want to wait on some DLC or something like that. But yeah, 9 Years of Shadow, overall very fun if you're looking for basically another Castlevania game to kind of play alongside your Dead Cells DLC. I think this is definitely worth checking out. It's been in development for forever, so there's been a lot of eyes on it, and I think some people have been a little negative about it, just because of, I think, the amount of time kind of in the oven it was versus what I think it's obviously hearkening back to, a very well-accomplished franchise. And then you kind of come over there, it's going to get heavy scrutiny. I totally understand that. So yeah, 9 Years of Shadows. And then lastly, and don't ask me why I'm playing this. I think I just got a feeling. I was like, I kind of want to play this. So I went to one of my local retro stores and I found a copy for pretty cheap. So I've been playing Max Payne 3. I don't know why. Wow. I just am. I just remember like getting it when it came out, and I was like, okay. And then I played like maybe like, I don't know, 4 hours of it or something like that. Like this had to be like what, 2012 maybe, something like that. And yeah, I played a couple hours of it years ago, and I was like, okay, whatever. And I never went back to it. And so randomly, I just kind of thought of it. I was like, I kind of just remember doing that dive move. And I was like, I kind of want to play Max Payne, but I don't want to deal with any jankiness. So let me get the most polished one. So I was like, let me get Max Payne 3. And I looked and it was like $10 or something like that. So I bought a copy. I double checked that it was backwards compatible on my Xbox. So I just popped it in, and I'm having fun with it. Like, it's stupid. Like, don't get it twisted. Like, it's a dub game. There's not much there. Like, so for a Rockstar game, it's surprisingly shallow in terms of the storyline. That's no surprise. Like, I don't think anybody has gone to Max Payne for like riveting storytelling, but it's your pretty much standard like guy hired to protect this. You fighting, I guess, cartel members. Technically, you're in Brazil. For anybody who doesn't remember, it's like Sao Paulo, and you're just going from kind of like set piece to set piece. And it's like a third-person shooting game. You obviously have that kind of slow down time mechanism that's like classic Max Payne, but it is pretty fun. Like, I won't get it twisted. Like, it's a simple premise, but it is pretty fun. It controls pretty much how I remember it, and so I'm getting a kick out of that. I don't know if I'm going to see that all the way through or anything like that, but I think it's fun enough to kind of burn some time, because I was kind of, I don't know why, I was like some of the newer games I have were not really resonating with me for a little bit, so I was like, let me give some older games a shot. And so, but I didn't, and of course I kind of keep like Castlevania 3 in rotation, so I don't really report that what we've been playing, because I kind of in a constant state of playing that. But I was like, man, let me go with something that like maybe I haven't gone through in quite a while, and I kind of want to revisit. So this is on a short list of games I kind of wanted to revisit. Max Payne 3. At some point I'm going to go back to Catherine, but there's a couple games I have in mind. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I've been playing. And then also a little bit of Resident Evil 6 that I'm kind of co-oping with someone, but and that, nothing to report on that. It's Resident Evil 6. Like, it's an action movie. It's Fast and the Furious with Leon, basically. But nothing else really to report on that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's funny. I've been looking at, obviously, coming off Resident Evil 4. It's like, man, Resident Evil 6 is one of those games where it's those three storylines, and I've only ever beaten Leon's storyline for good reason, obviously.
Yeah.
And I started watching videos, and not a spoiler. You fight basically a zombie dinosaur, and it's ridiculous. I can't believe that I played that. I never beat the other two storylines or anything like that, but it is one of those games where it's like, maybe one day I'll some reason go through it.
Yeah, I've only also ever played Leon's. Our intent is to get through all three, but who knows? I don't know how long that's going to take. But yeah, the game's not bad per se, and I can appreciate it kind of as you could tell like that was the peak of like Capcom's like response. Like they're responding to larger feedback and trends. Like obviously 5 was like heavily impacted by the kind of dude bro shooter era that kind of like really impacted it, and obviously not everybody loved that. So this was, I feel like, their concession in many ways, where it's like it has a lot of imagery and characters that are referential to Resident Evil's like heyday, but the gameplay is still largely informed by 5, which is like ammo scarcity is not really a thing for the most part. You're not really really worried about your health, and it's not the slow and plotting game. And again, it has these larger action set pieces, so it's not bad, but it definitely is like a weird game to go back to, because it's such a 2012, whenever it came out. It's such a then game. Like you could tell that it's just so responsive to like. You could just tell that like Capcom did not know what to do with the franchise at this point. Like they're just like, I don't know, like here's Leon again. Does that make you happy? And it's like, not really, but sure. But yeah, overall, I'm getting enough entertainment value out of it. I don't think I'm gonna be going through like the whole franchise or anything like that. I don't think that's gonna lead to me to like go into like 7 next or anything like that, because that's its own ball game. That's its own can of worms. I am not ready to return to quite yet, but it's a good like mindless game. Like if you, it's totally a game that you throw those subs on, throw a podcast on. I could see it being like actually a pretty good time if you just don't invest in it at all. Just kind of go from place to place and kill, because you're killing like hundreds of zombies. This is not like the old ones. So if you're just looking for a solid third-person shooter to kind of just mess around with, I think I can probably scratch that itch.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Unfortunate sense. But yeah, we can get into the stories. The first one's kind of a big one, just because of it was supposed to be the comeback year for it. But yeah, E3 has been canceled. This comes from Rebecca Valentine over at IGN. So, almost a year after announcing its return, the Entertainment Software Association announced today to its members that this year's Electronic Entertainment Expo E3 has been canceled. IGN can confirm. 2 sources have confirmed to IGN that the organization announced the cancellation via an email sent out to its members today. The email said that E3 remains a beloved event and brand, and that the 2023 version simply did not garner the sustained interest necessary to execute it in a way that would showcase the size, strength, and impact of the industry. Following the reports, the ESA issued the following public statement from Kyle Marsden, Klish Global VP of Gaming, ReedPop. This was a difficult decision because of all the effort we and our partners put toward making this event happen. But we had to do what was right for the industry and what's right for E3. We appreciate and understand the interested companies wouldn't have playable demos ready, and that resourcing challenges made being at E3 this summer an obstacle that couldn't overcome. For those who did commit to E3 2023, we're sorry we can't put on the showcase you deserve and that you've come to expect from ReedPop's event experiences. So this is one of those things that we unfortunately saw coming early on, when almost every week the big players were announcing that they wouldn't be there. Sony announced they weren't going to be there. Microsoft wasn't going to be there. Nintendo surprisingly said they weren't going to be there. Then I think we saw EA, and I think most recent Ubisoft was the big one. Tencent was big too. Tencent is a big one too. So they also started pulling out, and it got to the point where I was like, well, who's gonna be there?
Yeah. Devolver, basically.
Devolver Digital. So it's an unfortunate thing. And it's weird because we saw that these companies that were pulling out of here are somewhat still scheduled, or nothing's announced officially, are still going to be coming to, everyone calls it the E3 killer, which is Jeff Keighley's Summer of Games week. So, which none of the big guys I don't think have been confirmed. Jeff Keighley sometimes pulls things out of nowhere, so we never know. But it is unfortunate that in a world that they were going to try to redo E3 in a sense. We had digital conferences the last couple of years due to the COVID and the restrictions and everything. So this was going to be that big first in-person one, and nobody was going. The big guys had nothing, for just no real reason. They just said they weren't going. They've got their heads down working, and I thought, well, all right, they'll probably revert to a smaller digital event, and they came out and confirmed that wasn't happening either. So E3 not happening this year. I think this will probably be the last we kind of see of E3. I don't know where you go from here. What did you think of this?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think I would normally in some cases be kind of like, saddened to see the very obvious death of something like E3. But at the same time, I feel like this happened years ago. This is not a new thing. This was more so like E3 died and they were trying to resuscitate it and it didn't work. More so than like, oh, E3's gone, like that was it's going to be the last E3. Like I feel like E3 was already a remnant of a bygone era, and it was a sad reality of like generally like I am, despite the fact that like it's obviously not in the place that it once was, like I generally liked E3. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I would have loved to see kind of a proper resurgence of it, but the reality is it's a game of ROI. It's just return on investment, and if it makes sense for the companies to participate in this event and they can make a return and it can be worth it, whether it's networking or eyeballs or whatever, they do it. But obviously that hasn't been the case in a long time. And it's that digital format, man. If you want to blame anybody for the death of E3, technically blame Nintendo. They were the ones who brought this treehouse thing, and it worked so well, and it was so brilliantly put together. And then it was just a cascading effect from there. And it's one of those things where I'm sympathetic to the ESA to some extent, because E3 it's such a dependent thing. Their show is dependent on the participation of others, and the participation of others are dependent on the participations of the big boys. So basically, the moment the big boys stop playing, it makes it a natural cascading effect where like, okay, one person drops, oh, they're not going to be there, okay, I'm leaving too. Because again, the less companies that show up, that impacts participation, network opportunity, and makes it just less worth it. And that's all of that is just aside from the fact that like traditional, hey, I have a stage and I'm going to bring out Jason Derulo to like dance and talk while I talk about Just Dance. Like that's just kind of gone. Like that format is gone, and E3 I think just wasn't able to pivot fast enough. That's just the reality of things. Like in some ways I kind of look at E3 very similarly the way I look at GameStop, where it's like things changed fast, and they were not able to pivot as fast as others were able to swoop in. And so you had the Jeff Keighley's, you had these kind of video materials that were able to fill that void of E3, what little void was kind of left by them at that point. And then the companies did what kind of made most sense to them in a marketing perspective. And so that really left no space for them. And the only real demand at that point seemed to have been from the fans, the people who literally wanted to attend E3. Mm-hmm. And that can only take you so far, unfortunately. Obviously, the ESA did try to tap into that. They're like, okay, so all these companies don't want to play ball, but there is a tremendous demand for people to actually come to the expo event and actually participate. And so that was the year, you remember, where they opened it up and they kind of like allowed so many people to come. And that's awesome for the fans, but then it had like an insane like population issue. It turned into like Comic-Con, and it like just it locked up. And so naturally that provided a not great experience for the attendees, which in turn kind of like damaged what little bastion of hope they had, which was the people. The companies were already gone. The reveals were already done. People were either I'm gonna reveal it myself or I'm gonna do it at Game Awards. There was nothing left for E3. So at this point, if the people are not rocking with it, the companies are not rocking with it, like there's only so much they can do. I'm just surprised it took them this long to be like, okay, it's not happening. You know what I mean? Just because I kind of texted you about it. It's like, how many companies need to drop before like enough's enough? Like, who are you going to do this with? Like, there's like no one left. Maybe a little Square conference or something like that. But overall, I think it's one of those things that I could totally see in maybe 10, 15 years, kind of like a E3 reunion show. You know what I mean? Like kind of like a one-off. Like they do those in the Music Fest sometimes, where like they did like Woodstock 99 or something like that. It's like referential to an older event, but it's not something that's like annualized or anything like that. It's like a big deal you do every, like, I don't know, 5 years, and it's like, oh my god, we're gonna like tap back into that old energy. I think there is a space where that exists, but the kind of traditional yearly, E3 2023, 2024, 2025, like, that's dead. I just don't think that money exists anymore in that way to make it worth it for anybody involved, whether it's the ESA, the companies, or the fans. And so, it's like, it's sad in a way, but at the same time, the writing's been on the wall for so long that I've been grieved. Like, this is an old issue, and I feel like this conversation around the death of E3 happened like 4 years ago, 5 years ago, or something like that. Like, this is kind of just like them. They tried to Frankenstein something together, and it very obviously didn't come to fruition in the way that they hoped. But who knows? Who knows what the future holds? E3. The ESA and GameStop are like the two forces that are like very obviously done but somehow survive. So who knows how long these conversations will persist. I wouldn't be surprised if a 2024 event does try to be done. I wouldn't be surprised. Whether or not it happens, who knows. But I bet this is not the end of their attempts to make an E3. It's not smart, but I bet it's not the end.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Again, like you said, we've seen it been dying out for a while.
For a long time.
Especially when they opened it to, I forgot what they classified it, but like to influencers and stuff. And
yeah,
people were just able to go in there. And I remember companies, people off the record from IGN, everyone was complaining. It was like, yo, we can't do our job because there's not nobodies, but regulars there. Yeah. And it's one of those events where it's like, man, I would have loved to have been able to go to one day. It just, but by the time I ever even got the opportunity where we would have, I'm like, E3 was not what it was.
Exactly.
It wasn't the big thing. So
you and I want like 2013 E3 at the latest.
But it wasn't open, and for right reasons, it wasn't open to the public in that extent. So it is unfortunate, and it is. I do kind of miss having that organized week of knowing there was going to be announcements.
Yeah, me too.
Microsoft was doing one day. We knew like Monday was one company, the next day we knew what time they were going to be their announcements. And now it's random. Sometimes we get random trailers, random this, random. Nintendo does random. I mean, we have it coming up right in our next story. Just a random. Here's a 14-minute long session that we're going to talk about some stuff. This one was different, but they've done it before where it's like, yeah, tomorrow 30 minutes of random indie games or games we're releasing in a later year, and it's sporadic and you miss things this way, at least when you knew E3 week was happening. And it's the same we do now with Summer Game Fest. Less organized, because that one I feel like Jeff Keighley has things coming out randomly, but E3 you knew what time to wait and look for announcements. So it is unfortunate, but it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we knew it was coming, and it unfortunately had to happen.
Yeah, you raise a really great point of exactly what I mean by like what I miss, but that I feel like hasn't really gotten the chance to be co-opted by anybody else because of the nature of the industry these days, where it's like having this entire week, this massive event where you kind of go to one place and it's all these different companies participating, and it's like thing after thing after thing. You get Xbox on one day, and it was just nonstop. That I really do miss that. Almost you remember like sitting in front of the TV and watching it, and just like I'm like rushing home from work so I don't miss like Ubisoft's conference. I remember it was like when I was on the East Coast at that time, it was that 4 p.m. Ubisoft conference. That always was the most annoying because it would constantly get hit by my commute, and I think you were in the same boat too, where neither of us were in the ideal place to be watching it. And so I remember one year, I think I took off one day for I think it was like a day where there was like 3 conferences, and I was able to like get months ahead of it and actually take off a day of work just for E3 to just watch it. And it's stuff like that. I think that's what I miss. I like state of plays. I like the Nintendo Directs and whatever Xbox is calling it these days. I don't know what theirs is. But I like these things. But the problem is it's unceremonious because everybody it lives in their own world. Everything's so siloed. And I did like the consolidation around this single thing, this single Super Bowl, if you will. You know what I mean? Like where everybody can come together and come what it was like June or July. like it's go time. Like everything was centered around the industry was kind of structured in a way where, and eventually, I think Game Awards is close to that. Like, once Game Awards is coming, something's going to be revealed. But once upon a time, like, come this summer, you were going to find out about the entire slate, maybe for the next, 18 months of all these cool developers. Now it's kind of like it's a game by game thing at times. It's a developer by developer thing. Like Nintendo has their own way and they hold it super close to the chest, and state of plays kind of come out of nowhere, and some of them matter and some of them don't. And that is why I feel like that's a void left by E3. And I don't think it's going to be necessarily filled per se, because the industry just doesn't work that way anymore. It's so compartmentalized now. Like they don't, like, I think people try to be that middle person, aka like Jeff Keighley, I think tries to make that center again where people can kind of rally around. I think IGN has its own event that I think tries to do the same thing. But yeah, it just doesn't do it for me, because these are subsets of a already niche community. You know what I mean? Because you have gamers, and then you have gamers who actually like pay attention to like stuff at that level, and then on top of that, there's people you have that subset of people who know to like, okay, some guy named Jeff Keighley has some event that I can stream, or IGN very specifically, to go to. So it just doesn't get the eyes, and if it doesn't get the eyes, it doesn't get the participation in the major reveals, and so you get a lot of little DLC stuff, and this random game from 2008 is getting remade. Okay, that's cool, but I just miss those days of like, if there's gonna be an E3, you're probably going to get some crazy Mario, some crazy Zelda, then the new COD is going to be there. So EA is going to have some garbage nobody wants to play, and Ubisoft's going to have Assassin's Creed 47, and it's going to be fun. But I just miss those days where like there was a predictability to it in the best way, I think. Mm-hmm. But you kind of alluded to our next story that I'm pretty excited to talk about. So on March 28th, 2023, Nintendo released a 14-minute long gameplay reveal for their next big game, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. This is set to release on May 12th, 2023. And this is the first, I think, like long, detailed breakdown that we were able to get of Zelda. And I think a lot of people were very curious about this game. Naturally, Breath of the Wild, considered by many one of the best games, at least of the modern era, but to some people of all time, one of the best Zelda games. The game that kind of ushered in the era of, I think, the Nintendo resurgence in many ways with the Switch. This kind of like started that. And so here we are with the sequel, and a lot of people are like, okay, will they be able to pull it off again? What is this game going to look like? Not to mention, this is a game that's coming out that we know is going to be ambitious on hardware that's the same hardware as Breath of the Wild, just 5 to 6 years later. And so there's a lot of questions people had. And so I'm curious, Steve, like, judging by what you saw in this video, like, what are your thoughts about, the gameplay, the visuals, the different systems that they introduced? What are you thinking?
Yeah, they knew what they were specifically doing with this gameplay, because almost all the features we saw in here were new features.
Yeah.
They talked about how traversing to the Sky Islands would be. They showed a couple new mechanics. They did show. There was like two big questions I feel in the community was weapon generation coming back, and were there going to be dungeons? We got answer to one of those. Unfortunately, we don't have any idea what's going on with shrines, dungeons, whatever's happening there. But we do see that the weapons will degrade after a little time and uses. But that didn't show some of these new features where you can now fuse items. So you can, like, the big one was they took a stick and they put a rock on it. You could hit things with it. So that's gonna, I guess, help a little bit. Eventually I got the hang of how weapons worked, and I never just didn't have weapons with me. But I do like how opening some of this fun and very minute stuff too that they're gonna do with the fuse ability, which was the big one they showed. Putting an eyeball on an arrow makes it a homing arrow, which makes a lot of sense. It doesn't make sense, but it throws back to when I remember having tons of those eyeballs for no reason. I ended up selling them, throwing them out because you couldn't really cook with them or anything like that. Traversing looks very similar because it is in. I don't know if it's gonna be a remix map or it's gonna be based off a lot of it. But they showed, a little bit of the map, the traversing. They showed that new jump ability. I don't remember what it was called, where you go through the ceiling.
Oh yeah,
the levitate. And I like, it's a weird ability. I wonder how they're gonna story work that in, but I do like that it's gonna sometimes not make you have to do that climbing, which, especially late game in the Zelda, it just sometimes was just more, almost felt like padding. So this is gonna help with some of those abilities. But the fuse ability just is what they really harpened on, and that's what stuck out to me, because it looked like it can get pretty in depth with some of these flying machines, sailing machines, and that's all in good for people who are going to do all that stuff. I also like that they just showed very simple. They took 3 logs, put it together, put a fan, got across the water, because that's where I'm going to be.
Yeah,
I'm
probably
not going to be sitting there making these extravagant things when I can just get the job done. But I like that it shows, at least to what we've seen so far, having the ability to do both. Didn't see too much combat, really. The combat looks very similar. But the big one is that like you mentioned, that this is coming out on the same hardware that the first, that Breath of the Wild came out. And it's, how, what are we talking, 6-year-old hardware by now? 7-year-old hardware,
Yeah, 2017, so coming up on 6 years. Or 6 years exactly.
Coming up on 6 years old hardware, and you can't tell me that the game looks pretty. You can't tell me that there wasn't some fuzz. There's actually a very funny moment where it's almost a split second where in the gameplay they stop Link to talk about something, and there is a moment where he Joy-Con drifts and walks off.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, and everyone who saw it and has experienced Joy-Con drift knew, because it's like a weird stutter slow movement, not something you can really recreate on an analog stick. So there is Joy-Con drift in the trailer, but that's more
hilarious.
Hardware. But game, I've always had mixed feelings on the look of Breath of the Wild. It makes a lot of sense. Now we're seeing this, and it looks obviously very similar, and I'm not harping on that, but I just know when I put this on my dock that it's gonna look blurry. I am hoping it doesn't get choppy. But if we've seen anything, and I know Nintendo usually is pretty well with their games specifically, but we saw, Bayonetta, which is a way more graphically demanding game, struggle a lot. We saw Pokemon, that's a whole other issue, but we saw that game that looks very similar in certain aspects, struggle ridiculous amount. So that more worries me, is how's that gameplay moment to moment going to be, and can it recapture me for the next whatever hours I'm going to be playing. But what I saw looks intriguing. It looks, if it's naturally baked into the game, it just does look like an expanded sequel like we want. It doesn't look like just a DLC pack that they've and I didn't expect it to. So I'm excited. How did you think of it a little bit more play by play?
Yeah, I mean, generally I'm quite positive about it. There's a couple things. So one thing I think I can appreciate that how effectively they used their time. It's 14 minutes, and they really used that time to highlight what makes this game different in a game that otherwise looks very similar. And so I can appreciate that they showed all these new systems, and that's one thing I really do love about this team, and I love about Nintendo, where they're not necessarily always sequel for sequel's sake. They really make a thing where it's like, okay, if we're gonna do this, we need something new to show, a new way to have fun, a new system at play, and they have lots of new systems, and I can appreciate that. And I wouldn't bake it down into like calling it a gimmick per se, but there was that thing in Breath of the Wild where it was all about physics, that advanced physics engine, where this one has a more advanced kind of fusion crafting engine thing that I think is really, really cool, and it has even some kind of traversal implications that I'm like really impressed by, and I think it looks really, really solid and interesting to mess around with. Yeah, I'm probably also going to keep it pretty simple as well on my end. Like I think that's really cool, you can do that, but even Breath of the Wild, like you can do all these crazy stuff with the physics that I also really didn't mess around with for the most part. So yeah, overall I liked what I saw, but if there's anything that I had as kind of like a downside, it's the visuals. However, not in the way that I think a lot of people are talking about, where when I think naturally the comparison a lot of people make when they hear about this game and they look at Breath of the Wild is that Ocarina Majora thing, where it's the same engine, narratively connected, but tonally very different. And that is how I was looking at this game. And I guess the only thing I was a little bit disappointed of, and maybe this is just an indictment on my expectations and not what Nintendo's ever said, but when I kind of looked at this game and I saw that initial trailer in that much darker tone, I was really hoping that they would use that as an opportunity for a little bit of an aesthetic shift. Not the art style per se, but there was like a really brilliant thing. Like, and I've gone back to Ocarina to confirm this, but when you play that game, there's this beautiful highlight of like light blues, greens, and reds. But then when you play Majora's Mask, it really highlights these purples, these blues, and these oranges. And those small differences, those little palette swaps, if you will, allow for a very distinct experience that really lends itself well to not only match what is trying to be communicated through this game and the kind of atmosphere that they're trying to make, but also the fact that this is not only a darker in theme game, but like a visually distinct game. So despite them being in the same engine, I don't think anybody would say like Ocarina and Majora are like the same. You know what I mean? Like you play it and you're like, okay, they did a great job translating the same engine in two distinct ways. And I was really hoping with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom that they did the same thing. And yeah, if there's only one complaint, is that it looks exactly the same. Exactly the same. I love that there's new mechanics. I love the floating island thing, so they're expanding the map a little bit more. But I just wish that they did a little bit more to make it more visually distinctive from Breath of the Wild, instead of, because then naturally you have that idea where it's like, I know this is so content full and rich, and I have no doubt that this team is going to make it worth our time. But at the same time, it looks like an expansion on something they did previously. And so I was just hoping that they would take this as an opportunity to and nothing super cheap. It's not like I'm expecting them to just slap a reskin on the map and Saints Row 4. No, I'm not expecting that. Yeah. But just use this as an opportunity to play around with some new visual things. And again, this could very much still be the case. Like, they didn't show off everything. They showed off, kind of generally 1 to 2 areas, and then gameplay for the most part. So this still very much can still be a thing, but I want it to be a little bit more visually distinctive, so it can feel like its own thing. So when I say Breath of the Wild, you think you have a picture, that you kind of sitting on that plateau and looking over that vista. But then when I say Tears of the Kingdom, a different image comes up, a different look. Mm-hmm. And for right now, it's the same image for both. But again, we haven't seen a ton. So it's a small disappointment on my end, but I wouldn't say it's an indictment against them. And I don't really hold the visuals too much against them, so much as I hold it against Nintendo at large for kind of still forcing developers to develop on this older hardware. The Switch is doing well, so they haven't introduced no hardware. But yeah, because the reality is, when Breath of the Wild 1 came out, or not 1, but Breath of the Wild came out, it was already old hardware then. People forget that wasn't a new chipset in 2017. That was an older chipset that they opted for because it was a lot more inexpensive, so it allowed them to have a lower price point at launch. Basically, that was the idea, so they didn't have to hit you over the head. When you go for the more expensive chipsets, when you go for the crazy visual fidelity, then that's what happens with Steam Deck, for example. It's just a higher price point. It's a different experience. To keep things cheap, to keep things accessible, they made some concessions. In 2017, I think most people were able to stomach it for the most part. Like, Breath of the Wild was, because of the cell shading and the fact that it was 2017, I think people were like, okay, yeah, no, this is amazing to have on the go. But I think in 2023, the game industry is just in a different place. What we are able to think about, like, okay, what are we capable of doing handheld, has been fundamentally redefined since 2017. Now you can almost play anything with variable resolutions handheld. That's what Steam Deck has offered for us. And so I think that's the kind of tricky thing now, where it's like these new Nintendo games are introduced and they play sometimes pretty awesome, and sometimes they look really beautiful, like Metroid Prime, for example. But then there's this kind of realm of acceptability where it's like, okay, there's a point where this level of like visual flickering and the fact that it's 30 FPS, like, that's not industry standard anymore. It's kind of like we need a little bit more. But at the same time, these developers are not miracle workers, and so there's only so much power you can extract from the thing. And I think we're on the top end of that. And I have no doubt that Zelda's going to be amazing. But yeah, man, when I was watching that trailer, I was like, boy, what I would do to play this game on a PS5. Like, just if I could just, I hate that the visuals always have to be concession with Nintendo, because I don't 100% understand why. Like, why it can't be both. You know what I mean? Especially when they have a Switch with such a gorgeous OLED screen. The fact that, like, that OLED combined with a solid resolution and the ability to pump out, like, normal frame rates, I think could blast them to first place so fast again. Not that they're in last place or anything like that, but in terms of, like, where I go to play handheld games, yeah, my Switch usage has plummeted, you know what I mean? And they're still selling dramatically, but I would love for me to still reach for my Switch more often, but it's like, I hate that the power thing is always a concession with them. And I think to some degree Tears of the Kingdom is impacted by that, but I still have no doubt, and I have so much faith in this game to be Game of the Year contender, absolutely, despite whatever visual issues you might have with it. But I have no doubt that it will perform generally solid, because I know if it didn't, they'd punt it for sure, knowing Nintendo. They only seem to... I can only think of like 2 games that had significant performance issues out the gate from Nintendo. Obviously Pokemon, and then what was it, Hyrule Warriors 1 I think had some issues. But besides that, they release things in a proper state, and so I have no doubt that this will perform good enough. There's probably going to be frame dips. There's frame dips in Breath of the Wild as well, but you know, I think generally it's going to perform okay, and it's going to be a beloved game. And judging by what they've shown that they're not taking the sequel thing for granted. They're actually putting in the work to differentiate it from Breath of the Wild, at least on a systems level, and probably on a narrative level, that I think can generally please everybody. There's going to be people who look at this game and it's like, I am not playing no 720, 30 FPS games. I think there are like the graphics hounds that are just not going to play ball with that. That is what it is. But I think for the most part, the Nintendo fans will be pleased with what they saw. And generally I was as well. You know, it was I, you know, blown away by what I saw? No, not really. It's in line with what I expected, but I have high expectations for this, and I think it's going to meet it. So at the end of the day, that's ultimately what matters.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's my thing as well. It's like I was hoping I'd be more like excited, right? Like I saw something like cool. That's some stuff that I'm gonna do in the game. Besides that, I kind of expect already from the game. But I do think there is going to be that community, especially now that we have to remember this is also Nintendo's first jump to $70 for
that's true, yeah,
their game. And I know it's only a $10 increase and stuff, but I have seen the conversation where people are like, well, you know, Breath of the Wild was really just a Wii U game brought to Switch. What's the excuse this time? And there's a fair point. You know, I've looked at Breath of the Wild, you know, side by side from Wii U to Switch, and the differences are very minor.
Very. Yeah.
And so when you think that Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, there's gonna be times where you can not tell which one you're playing. And the Wii U, that's an even older console, so nothing we've seen makes it look like this was developed for Switch. This is just developed because they had, like you're saying, a lot of the assets over and stuff like that. It's like, I don't want a game that could run on Wii U on my Switch in 2023 for $70 when we see what other companies are doing. And I know Nintendo's in its own aisle, but it's rough when you're paying the same price. You know, Resident Evil 4, I think that was only a $60 purchase, but that game could have easily went for $70, and it didn't. So different games, different animals to take care of. I completely understand that, but that's the culture that Tears of the Kingdom is releasing to. But if they can do what they do well, like you said, if they can hit at least a steady frame rate of a minimum at least 30, you got to be able to hit that 30 consistently. Then, and you deliver with the rest of the stuff. You have to tell a more narrative story, more not linear story, but a normal story, not so many flashbacks, hiding, go unlock the cutscenes by taking pictures of a random mountain. Yeah. Because that stuff can't exist, because I mean, it can't, because this is a sequel going forward, and I'm hoping at least that's delivered that way. And then I'm reiterating again, just I want dungeons. I want the shrines can exist, but at least give me some sort of bigger dungeon as well. But besides that, everything else does look really good. I am excited. I think I think they preference the gameplay reveal with development is done, so they're probably just doing the day one patch basically. So I'm assuming May 12th, that Friday, is gonna hit without an issue.
Yeah, I mean, unless they find some like catastrophic bug. I mean, at this point they're in polishing mode, so you would imagine we'd be good to go. And yeah, technically, yeah, we're what, a month and a half away, something like that. Yeah. So that's pretty exciting. We're pretty close to that, and I think things are going to really get going. There's a number of games I think that are going to be popping up soon. Resident Evil, I think kind of like opened the floodgates of that, but Jedi Survivor, that's coming. We're going to have Legend of Zelda coming. Final Fantasy 16. It's going to kind of be like one after another, and I'm pretty excited about this because these are the big players now. Finally, I mean, there's like some awesome games, on the front end of the year that I really enjoyed, but I think these kind of like AAA major experiences are coming, and I'm really excited to see kind of what that looks like, because we're going to get a combination of what I'm really curious to see what super experienced on the hardware Nintendo looks like, because there are lots of games that they release on the console, for example, ports, less demanding games. But the last time we had a Switch game first party that was like really pushing it, it's been a little bit, you know what I mean? Like we got a couple up front. You got the Breath of the Wild, you got the Odyssey, Bayonetta. I don't really consider a first party because it is still like Platinum doing that. So yeah, it's been a little bit, and so I'm curious to see, like, okay, yes, Breath of the Wild did come out, when it came out in 2017 and all that, in the state that it did, but at the same time, that was new hardware for them. Like, it was developed for the Wii U, and then they kind of reverse engineered it for the Switch. I'm curious to see what a first party Nintendo developer 6 years into the cycle of a hardware, like, what power can be extracted, because you got to keep in mind, like, historically, that has produced some really cool stuff for different developers. Like, that's how we got like Last of Us, for example, is the power that they extracted from pretty old hardware at that point, and we're able to do some really cool things because they've worked with it for a long time. So I think we'll be able to see some really cool things, hopefully, from the team over there at Nintendo, because they've had the Switch for so much time now. So they've had so much time to learn it, and different tricks and ways to probably expand power. So maybe it'll run like a lot better, even though it is, limited hardware and older hardware. Who knows? This is the only SKU of hardware that they're developing for, and they've had a long time to learn it. I think we have some really cool potential here, and so I'm excited to see what they do for it. I have no doubt that they'll develop something solid, because I have pretty good faith in this team to do something at least very solid, if not like amazing. You know what I mean?
No, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. This is their experience data now by this point, so it should only be good, if not great.
Absolutely. So those are the two stories we had this week. We'll be back for the next show with more information and hopefully more games, because I think by that point Mega Man Battle Network Collection might be out by that time. Yeah. I'm very excited about that game.
Oh, I'm so excited, yeah.
So that we'll have a little bit more to talk about during that show, and we hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I'm Drew Bro, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope you guys enjoyed.
And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.